Thanks, Christina. Welcome, everyone. I debated this morning whether I was going to put on Gene Simmons makeup for this presentation, but I just decided to go with my regular ECSI look for the presentation. But we appreciate everybody taking your time. As Christina said, more than 300 of you are in here. Hopefully, we'll be close to 500 when well, actually, we're over 400 from what I see. And hopefully we'll be close to 500 before all is said and done. And again, thank you for taking the time. So a lot of information to get through. So without further ado, let's dive in here. So who is ECSI? So I know we've got a mixture of ECSI clients and non-clients watching today. And even if you're an ECSI client, perhaps there are some things you'll pick up here that you may not have known about us before. But so who is ECSI? So kind of a tag phrase we've come up with is we are your partner in the evolution of higher education. And, we look at two primary things surrounding that in our partnerships with our schools. We understand that as institutions of higher education, your primary mission is to educate students, right? It's not to do these back office tasks like generating 1098-T forms, right? So our role is to try to unburden our schools from those tasks and take them on your behalf so that you can focus on your primary mission, which is educating students. And then secondly, ECSI really serves as an extension of not only your office, but really of your school in general. A lot of times ECSI is the face of the school, quite frankly, and it's our job and our duty to make sure your students and alumni have positive experiences with us every single time. So those are two main goals that we have. Yes, we have 50 years in higher education servicing. Have been celebrating this year 50-year anniversary. So obviously the company's been around a long time. Started off extremely small and humble, privately family-held company, and has really grown over the years. A lot of that growth has been organic with just a lot of referrals we get from one school to another, and we appreciate that so much. But so we're over 1,750 clients at this point. We're a trusted partner of the Department of Education, and that's surrounding Perkins loan, that whole assignment process that's been ongoing with the wind down of the Perkins program that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And some of you are probably thinking, well, what does ECSI being a trusted partner of the Department of Ed have to do with 1098-Ts? Well, I would say probably nothing directly, but indirectly, certainly. Many of you probably don't know that, just by and large, because of this government contract we have, ECSI has to go through over 20 different audits every single year. So the government really demands a lot out of their third-party partners as far as data security is concerned. I mean, it's important, let's be honest, whether or not you have a government contract, but just all those different audits and different efforts we have to undertake, it really seeps into all of the other solutions that we offer, including 1098-Ts. So there's that indirect benefit there. We are a service and software company, although if I had to boil it down to one of those, I would say we're probably more service oriented than software, but we are technically both. And then complete compliance. When I do these presentations, I often say, the reason companies like ECSI exist is to help schools comply with, the myriad of regulations that are out there. We know there's a lot of federal regs. And if you've been paying attention in recent years, the states are really getting in on the act quite a bit, introducing their own regulations. And, so we have a compliance department, a compliance officer whose job is to keep an eye on all of this stuff. Even from my standpoint, being on the COHEO board keeps me close to what's going on both at the state and federal level. So compliance is very important in what we do, obviously. Real quickly, just to run through these 6 items. These are the 6 what we call our core services at ECSI, really what we're known for. So, and they're all under the what we call Select branding. So we have Servicing Select, which is really our campus-based loan servicing, which many of you know us for. Perkins loans, institutional loans, nursing, health professions, all of that. We've been doing loan servicing for all of our 50 years. Outsource Select is a call center and outsource solution where literally ECSI can serve as the school's call center. So we can take your student calls. We can do that full time. We can do that during peak periods, how some things are seasonal. We can do outbound call campaigns on behalf of schools. So that's all under Outsource Select. Refund Select is just that. It's refund disbursements to students. By and large, your Title IV refunds, which we can help schools with via paper check and ACH refunds. Recovery Select, which is our past due account or delinquent receivable student retention solution, very student focused, a high return on investment for our schools, really trying to create better outcomes for students that may have a delinquent receivable and working with them very closely. TaxSelect, which is what we're here to talk about today. And TaxSelect is more than just 1098-T processing, as you will see as we go through the presentation. And lastly, Tuition Select, which is our tuition payment plan solution that allows students to sign up for a payment plan for their tuition where they can spread out their payments over a period of time. So here we go with a pop quiz. You don't have to give us your answer here, but so 2022 marks what important anniversary? So I'm sure many of you are immediately saying, well, wait a second, he just went through on a previous slide, it's the 50-year anniversary of ECSI, which is correct. But that's not what we're alluding to here. It's the 25th anniversary of the Taxpayer Relief Act of 1997. So that's how long 1098-Ts have been around. So I don't know if any of you watching and listening in have been at your school or in higher education for 25 years. You may remember 1997. I remember when they introduced this act. I was working for the other company. And I just remember that there was a lot of panic amongst higher education and, schools in particular. They were wondering, we've got to provide what? A tax statement to our students? How are we going to do that? So, our company, quite frankly, had some vision. We took advantage and developed a solution. We went around the country doing workshops about this. And it was 10 years before I would join ECSI, but ECSI basically did the same thing and went through that whole process when this was introduced. All right, so let's dive in and start with the basics. So you have, again, the Taxpayer Relief Act of 1997. Now, TRA 1997 is obviously much more than what you see on the screen here, but we've kind of boiled it down to this single sentence where school has to file a 1098-T form for any enrolled student where a reportable transaction was made, and that would be the payment of tuition and fees. Second thing we're going to talk about in this presentation is IRS Penalty Notice 972CG, and basically this went into effect, it was 2013 when it started, and some schools were getting hit with penalty notices because of filing 1098-Ts with incorrect or missing tax ID numbers. So we'll get into quite a bit of detail on that. So when we talk about 1098-Ts, truly it is benefit to the student, from a tax implication standpoint. You have the tax credits, American Opportunity and Lifetime Learning tax credits. There's also possible education tax deductions. I should take a moment to mention 1098E forms. A lot of you are probably familiar with the 1098E. We certainly are at ECSI because as a loan servicer, we produce and distribute 1098Es to student loan borrowers for the interest they paid during the year. And those forms, it basically represents a interest deduction on a tax return, whereas the 1098T is by and large a tax credit. So two different types of benefits there. So here's the 1098T form. By and large, a very simple form. The primary fields on this would be the taxpayer ID number or the SSN, student name and address. You have the amount of grant aid or scholarships, which is box 5. And then the amount of payments received for qualified tuition and related expenses, which is box 1. Several years ago, it's probably been almost 5 years now. I know we know how time flies, but prior to that, schools used to be able to report either box 1, which is tuition and fees paid, versus box 2, which was tuition and fees billed to the student. But then when the change was made via the IRS, basically eliminating box 2. So now, for several years now, everybody's been reporting only box 1 for 1098Ts. So what is qualified tuition and related expenses? I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Deanna Bassano. Deanna?
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. So qualified tuition and related expenses. So we're going to talk about things that should be included here. So first is going to be tuition and fees that are required for enrollment. Next is going to be books and supply charges, if they're required to be paid to the institution. And then some of the things that you don't want to include are going to be personal expenses. So room and board, medical travel, if there's any dining expenses, those are not going to be included. And then also expenses for courses involving sports, games, hobbies, unless they're part of the degree program for the student.
All right, so here we go for another pop quiz. You don't have to give your answers. We'll give them as we go along. We know, a lot of schools, there's a lot of fees, right, that could be potentially assessed to a student. So the question always becomes, you have these different types of fees. Which ones do you include on the 1098T and which ones do you exclude from the 1098T? And the key thing is, are the fees required for enrollment? Or is it more of a personal type of expense? So first one is a technology fee. Yes or no? Do you include it on a 1098T or not? Well, the answer is yes, you do, because it's part of the student's schooling. It's required for enrollment. Health insurance fees. If the student is assessed a health insurance fee, no, that is not included because, again, it's a personal related fee. It's not required for enrollment. Transportation fees. It could be parking fees, parking permits, that type of thing. Are those included? Again, the answer is no, because it's a personal fee and not required for enrollment. Lab fees, are those included? The answer would be yes. Certainly a lab fee is included because it's part of various classes that a student may be attending. So it's part of and required for enrollment. How about sports, games, hobbies fees? This one's a little bit tricky. So the answer would be no, with a caveat there that if these types of fees are required for enrollment for the student, then you would include them on a 1098T. So it really depends on the situation. You kind of have to be careful with sports, games, and hobby fees. Generally, they're not included, but they can be included in some instances. So I like this slide just as a takeaway for schools. You'll have access to this. I think it's good to have something like this where you have side by side on the left-hand side, what to report on a 1098T fee-wise versus what not to report on the right-hand side. So you can clearly see the differences where you have tuition and fees that are required for enrollment versus those that are more of a personal expense, right? So we're not going to go through all of these, but it's a good takeaway from this presentation. It's a nice slide to have access to.
Okay, so now we're going to get into who should receive a 1098T form. So individuals that are enrolled for any academic period and for whom the institution receives a payment of qualified tuition related expenses during the calendar year, and that's from any source. So whether the student pays it, a grant pays it, you're going to include that, or that student should get one, I should say. Students that are not currently enrolled, but for whom there was a prior year adjustment made in that current year, you also want to provide them with a 1098T form. Now, some examples of when you do not need to provide a 1098T form to a student. So if there's non-credit courses, students enrolled, they're not getting any credit for that. You don't want to provide them with a 1098T form. Students whose entire tuition and related expenses were waived or paid for with a scholarship, you do not need to provide them one. Students whose entire qualified tuition and related expenses were paid under a formal billing arrangement, again, don't need to provide one for them. And then the last one, non-resident aliens. Do not have to provide a 1098T form for them unless they ask for it, then you have to. And then, so now I just want to talk about some important things. So first I want to talk about electronic consent. So if you are an ECSI client, we send out a e-consent email template that you can send out to your students. You want to make sure you get that sent out to them so that they can start signing up to get their forms electronically. If you collect them in-house, you just want to make sure that you get that electronic consent file to us by the end of December so that we can get that loaded into our system. And then if you are a TouchNet managed service client, you just want to make sure that you have your 1098T consents turned on in the TouchNet system so that we can get those consents come January from TouchNet. And then just some important dates. So January 31st, that's when all 1098T tax forms have to be postmarked by. And then March 31st is the deadline to have the information submitted to the IRS.
And a little bit later, towards the end of the presentation, Deanna will go over some other deadlines that are ECSI deadlines in our timeline in this process. So let's talk about the IRS penalty 972 CG. So I remember when this came into play. So, the first bullet there, it says the audit of the 2011 1098T forms was the first of its kind, and the IRS proposed penalties for missing or incorrect tax ID numbers. So the way this happened, kind of interesting, it was 2013 when the IRS did this audit. So it would have been nice if the IRS would have perhaps given the higher education community some heads up that this was coming, that maybe they were going to start taking a look at this, and maybe there was. I'm trying to think back. They may have been foreshadowing that this was coming, but the interesting thing is the audit was in 2013, but they looked back at 2011. So it kind of, I think in a lot of ways caught schools off guard, and a lot of schools unfortunately got penalty notices starting back then. Now, in the second bullet, those two amounts you see there that are bolded, those are the current amounts. So you have $280 for each 1098T that's submitted with a missing or incorrect tax ID number. And there's a maximum penalty of $3 million per year per school. Back when this started in 2013, these penalties were lower. I know the maximum was like $1.5 million. I can't remember exactly what the individual penalties were, but So they've kind of creeped up a little bit over the years. I remember just hearing about this, it's almost 10 years ago now. There was a school that got a penalty notice for over $1 million. This was, back in 2013. I don't know if they paid it or disputed it, but I mean, obviously that's quite a hefty fine to have to deal with. I'm going to turn it back over to Deanna.
Okay. So I just want to talk a little bit about getting corrections out there and how that can help you in the amount of penalty that you receive from the IRS. So corrections within 30 days of the March 31st deadline. For those, the penalty is reduced to $50 per form versus the $280. And then that maximum amount is lowered to $500,000. So at ECSI, we make sure we submit by March 31st. And then when we send out our corrections to the IRS, we make sure we're within that 30 days for that correction, so that anything that is corrected during that time goes in, and then that penalty would be lessened. And then anything from 31 days to on or before August 1st, same thing. It is a reduced penalty, $100 instead of the $280, with the maximum to not exceed the $1.5 million. And again, at ECSI, we submit monthly, but we just make sure that that last submittal is at the end of July to make sure it meets that August 1st deadline.
Yeah, and as far as disputing a penalty, I think the important thing is if you get a penalty notice, please review it carefully. There's information on there, how to contact the IRS, how to go about doing a dispute. I mean, you may even want to go just depending on the scope of the penalty, you may want to even go so far as to present it to your school's legal counsel, just to make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted when you go ahead to submit a dispute. So that penalty notice is going to step you through what you need to do. And they provide their toll-free number on the notice. And I know there's an address on how to do the dispute in writing. I don't think they give you an email address. I'm not 100% sure of that. But you want to make sure, if you're going to go ahead and do a dispute, you want to act pretty quickly on the penalty notice. You don't have unlimited time to do the dispute. The exact time frame, I wanted to say it was like 45 days or something like that, but you do want to jump on that as quickly as possible. So importantly, how do you avoid penalties, right? Everybody wants to avoid penalties. So I'm going to turn it back over to Deanna to talk about the required tax ID number certification.
Yes. So I believe it was 2016 is when the IRS added this checkbox to the 1098-T form. And this checkbox is to certify the TIN that you have for the student. Or if you don't have a TIN, just certifying that you met your requirements to try to obtain it from the student. And that checkbox, so if you are submitting the IRS 1220 format to us, there's a field position, which is position 544. A 1 in that field indicates that the box should be checked for that student. And then again, if you were to send us the ECSI standard layout, there's a space in there where you can indicate whether the certification box should be checked for that specific student.
So, I would say again, Deanna, would you say, the bottom line is if the school's doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're soliciting properly, make sure the box is checked.
Right.
Because I seem to recall a school that for whatever reason, they didn't check the box. And of course, what happened? Penalty notice to the school.
Yes.
So what do you want to do to proactively collect tax ID numbers? So the IRS form W-9S is probably the most commonly used form to collect that information. I believe Nakubo created their own kind of a pseudo W-9S form that you can use, but I would say probably most schools use the IRS form. Now, when you talk about the paper form, there's a couple of problems I would say inherent with having a paper W-9S. You know, it's one thing to present the student with the form, it's a blank form, that's fine. But when they complete it and send it back to your school, it could cause, you know, there's security implications potentially, because, you know, what if a student decides to scan it and email it back? Well, we know that email, unless it's specifically sent through some type of a secure method, email in general tends to not be secure, right? Plus, you're dealing with a paper form. Nobody likes to deal with paper forms. You probably have a hand-filled out form. We know how people's handwriting could be. It could be difficult to decipher some of the numbers in their tax ID number. Then you're having to go back to the student, you know, so, and then plus if you're using paper forms, you should store them or securely or destroy them. You know, so you got to deal with all those different things when it comes to paper. Using a secure portal is probably a better idea. So I think in recent years, more schools have been looking to try and do that. But do you have the resources at your school to set up a secure portal to gather this information? Maybe you do, possibly. That's great if you do. Maybe you don't. So if you don't, and speaking of using a secure portal, and I don't know if everybody on this webinar knows this, some of you may, but within the last year, ECSI, we introduced a new W-9S solution to help schools with this matter. So it is obviously related to 1098Ts. It's something schools can use in conjunction with 1098T processing, or you can use this service standalone. In other words, you can have this W-9S solution and ECSI might not be processing your 1098Ts. So it can kind of go either way. It's a 100% online solution. It's secure. Basically, we create a custom link and website for your school. We provide you with the link. You can house it on your website, or you can email it to students. It'll take them to a secure site, kind of like what you see there in the image on the slide, and they can fill in the information. Once they save it, we have a cumulative CSV formatted report that we provide back to the school that you could use to consume that information into your student information system. So again, it's a way to really help schools get away from that paper process with the W-9S.
Yep, and I just want to add here, Chris, so not only is it a custom link, but the actual web page can be customized as well with, you know, your school's logo, your school's colors. You can add those things in. We can customize, you know, your student ID field on there. So if you don't call it a student ID, you call it something else, we can actually customize that so that when the student enters it, they know exactly what they're putting in there.
Thank you for that. You know, we do try to do a lot of co-branding as much as we possibly can. That just gives students a little more comfort level that they're going to something that's legit, that's associated with their school. You know, and again, in the gathering of tax ID numbers, you know, during the course of a academic year, there's some natural opportunities where it makes sense to try and gather that information, you know, during admissions, during the FAFSA, orientation, registration. You know, the important thing is, again, the IRS rules that say that schools must solicit for tax ID numbers in writing at least once a year. And that's for any student that's missing a tax ID number in their records for whom a 1098-T reporting is required. So, you know, that's very important, and that's where we get into the whole W-9S process. So the Social Security Administration has rules, formatting rules for tax ID numbers, Social Security numbers, that should be followed. And, you know, I think, again, you know, if the school has an IT resource that can, you know, you could write a little routine possibly that reads into your student information system, because you have all your SSNs in there, and you can look for these conditions that we show here to kind of weed out any invalid SSNs potentially. So, you know, we know that SSNs need to be numeric with 9 digits, right? That's pretty basic. You cannot start an SSN with 3 zeros or 3 sixes. Positions 4 and 5 can't be 2 zeros. The last 4 digits of the SSN can't be all zeros. You can't have 9 digits that are all identical. And SSNs cannot start with number 9. So those are just some rules that the Social Security Administration has set up. Well, we're calling this the biggest challenge for schools. Maybe this is the biggest source of frustration for schools. So the IRS has a tax ID number matching service. And, you know, if your schools, you can use it like when you're filing W-2s for your employees or 1099 forms. But the way the current law is written, the matching service is not available for checking the validity of the tax ID numbers on 1098-T reporting. It's just the way it is. That's the way it's been for years. There's never been a real serious movement to maybe change that and open it up for schools. I don't know the reason why, but it just bears pointing out because it is certainly frustrating for everybody. So now we can talk about, you know, ECSI's SSN and name validation solution. Turn it back to you, Deanna, to talk a little bit about this.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. So our SSN and name validation solution is a 4-point validation. So we're checking for 4 things. First is the SSN issuance validation. So was the Social Security number issued by the Social Security Administration? That's going to be the first thing. Next is the SSN match validation. And this is checking to make sure that the name that you provide and the Social Security number that you provide match. Next is going to be the death master information. So this is checking to see if this Social Security number has been reported as deceased to the Social Security Administration. And then the last thing that it checks for is the alternate identity verification. So this is just checking to see if there are any alternate names that have been associated with the Social Security number.
Yeah, you know, and once again, I mean, you could see, you know, this particular, and it's an optional solution that we offer. It's obviously has a connection to 1098-Ts, but once again, it's something that a school can take advantage of standalone. So even if you're not using ECSI to process 1098-Ts, we can run validation on your behalf. And basically what happens is you give us a simple, like a demographic file. We run it through this process. Within 48 hours, we pass back to you results. So we're basically telling you valid or invalid. So we're trying to find if you have any, we like to call it the needles in the haystack, you know, in your group of SSNs, ones that may be invalid. So we like to say, leave it to the experts. You know, for us at ECSI, you know, at this point, and we're very grateful for the 1,000+ schools that do use us for our TaxSelect solution. We've done over 6 million tax documents each of the last, I want to say it's 3 years. So it's a big part of what we do, obviously. And then, of course, you know, the compliance, which I mentioned earlier, meeting those IRS deadlines and all the requirements, which is very important. So now we'll go back to Deanna to talk about really the steps in our 1098-T process that we follow.
Yep. So we do have a full implementation support and training. So when you come on as a client, you will go through an implementation process. We will provide you with any information, documents that you need, and then we also provide training. Then when you're ready, in January, you submit a secure file to us. We will create those forms for you, provide you access to those and some reports. And then upon your approval, we'll print and mail those forms by January 31st. Corrections can be made via our website. So you're able to make individual corrections to forms through our site. If you have a large group of forms that need corrected, you can also send us a correction file. And any of those corrections that are made by March 25th are automatically included in the submission that goes to the IRS by the March 31st filing deadline. And then if students have any questions, we also have, or we do offer tier 1 call center support. So that means that, we can answer questions about, what is a 1098-T form? How do I get that form off of your site? Things like that. We can't answer questions regarding, what is this amount made up from? We just don't have that information. But any of those tier 1 support questions, we can absolutely assist your students with.
Yeah, we can't give any tax advice either. So
right.
That's an important thing. Yeah, so just to reiterate, some of the themes we've already touched on today. So our solution, it's fully compliant, obviously, with the Tax Relief Act of 1997. Again, the goal is to reduce the school's workload. I still talk to a lot of schools every year who tell me, they're still printing 1098-Ts, and in their office, right in their office, they're folding and stuffing them into envelopes. And, that's something that, we can certainly take off your hands, obviously. We have our TaxSelect experts, such as Deanna, supporting our schools throughout the process. As Deanna just mentioned, our tier 1 level call center support for the students. Complete training this month, October, we're starting our 1098-T webinar training series, and it runs all the way through March. So you're talking about 6 months worth of webinar training. And we also record those sessions. We make them available on the website so you can view them at your convenience as well. The setup is quick and easy, that Deanna can attest to. And, again, we have user-friendly, easy path client and student websites. So back to Deanna she talked earlier about kind of the 2 main deadlines that the IRS has around 1098-T reporting. This is our timeline, and she's going to step us through that.
Yep. So starting September 9th, we provided the electronic opt-in template to clients so that you could have that sent out to your students so they could start to, sign up to get their 1098-T form electronically. Our testing period is opening up on October 24th, and that's going to run through December 16th of this year. December 30th is when we have a deletion of all of the test data just to prepare ourselves for our production period. So our production period this year is going to run January 3rd to January 16th. So during that time is when we would expect you to send us your production file. January 20th is going to be the deadline to approve the data so that we can have it mailed out by January 31st. February 1st through March 24th, that's going to be that correction period. So that's where I was saying, you can send us a correction file, you can make manual corrections to the 1098-T forms, and then we get everything prepped and submitted to the IRS by March 31st. And then April 1st through July 31st, that's when we do any additional or corrected 1098-T forms. That's when we will submit them monthly to the IRS.
All right. So about 45 minutes in, and we've certainly have time to field some questions. And I see some stuff has come in and through the Q&A, so Christina's going to help us navigate those. And
Yeah. So we're going to start out with the questions that are in the Q&A box. So, and then we'll move over to the ones that are in the chat box. So I didn't skip you if we're just kind of starting with one and then we'll move on to the other one. So first question is from Dara Dix. And I apologize in advance if I mutilate anybody's names, I will do my best. Question is, if a student buys books for online bookstore and it is billed to the student account, is this fee included in box 1?
I believe so. What do you think, Deanna?
So
Paid to the school, right? I'm going to go back to that slide.
yeah, that's what I'm looking. That's what I'm doing right now. If they're required to be purchased from the school, then it's a yes.
Right. You see that in the kind of towards the upper left-hand corner here. So hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, next question from Amber Beckley. If a student is not enrolled in the current year but made a payment for a prior year, do you have to report that?
So if they paid in the current year for a prior year, I want to say yes, because it's going towards qualified tuition and related expenses.
Well, assuming it is, then I
Right.
would say the answer is yes.
Right.
We have a comment from Susan Rose, says, regards to that, no, because there's no enrollment, but we have another comment. Yes, IRS is on a cash basis and not accrual. So just some additional information from the folks in the crowd.
And we appreciate the chiming in, and please do so, because, you know, I'm sure many of you are dealing with this stuff every year. You have a lot of knowledge out there.
And then I want to go back to the first question regarding the books. Lori Borg asked looks like a follow-up question to that. What if the bookstore is an independent organization, but it charges directly to the student account?
So an independent organization, meaning they're not part of the school.
But it does charge the student account, as she followed up with that information.
Yeah, we probably have to follow up on that and get an answer. Are you able to capture all these questions? And if we can go back with answers.
Absolutely. Okay. Next question from Doug Simon. Would gift or payment from a grandparent be included in tuition payments?
Yes.
Yeah, because isn't it payments from all sources?
From all sources. It doesn't matter where it came from. If it was applied to qualified tuition and related expenses. Yep.
Exactly.
Next question from Karen Friedrich. I hope I said that okay. And with regards to, I believe this is regarding ECSI solution, where can you see who has signed up for electronic consent?
So Karen, if you log into the EasyPath system under TaxSelect, and you go to manage forms, you'll see that there's a link that says, I don't know exactly there's a button and it'll say something about the electronic consent, but when you click on that, that's going to open that WebEx system for you directly to that electronic consent report. And you can run that report by a date range.
Okay, next question is from Greg Atkins. For formal billing arrangements for the Florida prepaid, that covers tuition and fees, would a 1098-T be required?
I do not know the answer to that at this point. I would have to look into that and get back to you.
And again, we will make note of who asked what questions, and we'll actually make a whole list and send out all of the anything we didn't answer here. We'll send that out with the recording and with the presentation, just so everybody knows. This one is an anonymous question. Can you give an example of a billing arrangement that would not require us to send a 1098-T?
Yes, so an example of that would be a formal billing arrangement between an institution and the student's employer, or a governmental entity such as the Department of Veterans Affairs or the Department of Defense.
Okay, next question from Felicia Wood. Our parking fee is a requirement of enrollment and a mandatory fee. Would it be included?
Can you say that again? Is she saying that it is a required?
So our parking fee is a requirement of enrollment and a mandatory fee. Is it included?
I would say yes, if it's required for enrollment. Because that's the key distinguishing factor. That's interesting to know that they require it as part of enrollment, but I would say then yes, you would report it.
Okay, next question from Nicole Brown. Do non-resident aliens have a deadline that they have to request the form by?
Not that I am aware of. When you look at the 1098-T instructions and it goes over those exceptions where you don't have to provide one, it says that non-resident alien students, unless requested by them, but it doesn't say, anything about, they have to request it by a certain date. So I would say if they request it, you have to provide it, no matter when it is.
Okay, the next question from Keziah Wanamaker. You mentioned that students not enrolled will receive a 1098-T form for adjustments made in a prior year. Does this apply to deferments applied to clear delinquencies from a previous year, bringing the students current and out of default, for instance? It is a change on their account. Also, what if there is a small remaining balance due to late fees and we instruct Heartland to make adjustments to close out the account? I just wanted to clarify what adjustments would prompt these forms being issued for the prior year. Also, are they then mailed to the borrower, or is the borrower notified they can log in and download or print the form? We can break that out if we need to.
Yeah, the question is asking about deferments, which tells me they're talking about a student loan, which would be a 1098-E form. But the 1098-E form is only presented based on interest that was paid during the calendar year. And it all depends, sometimes it's required to give the student a 1098-E if they paid $600 or greater in interest during the year. A lot of our schools choose to just have us send the 1098-E regardless of the amount of interest, because you don't want a borrower paying $200 in interest. They don't get a 1098-E, and guess what? They're going to turn around and call you and ask you where their tax form is. So I think the person asking the question is asking about 1098-Es and not 1098-Ts. Because, when you talk about adjusting accounts because there's a small balance due to a late fee or something like that, that's a student loan related question to me. That's how I interpret it.
If you have a follow-up question to that, please put it into the chat. But just to make sure we answer the whole question, I don't know if this still applies based on what you answered, Chris, but are the borrowers then mailed a new form, or are they able to log in and download and print a form?
Well, as far as I know, now 1098-Es, everybody that gets a 1098-E is mailed one.
Okay.
We do post it online where they can access it on the website, but we mail every single 1098-E as far as I know. So.
Okay. Next question from Carmen Travis Kemp. We are a banner school that is implementing an online certificate program. Students will receive a credit. However, their charges and payments are not on their student account in Banner. They are all done via the TouchNet marketplace. Are we obligated to issue a 1098T form for them?
I would say that that's outside of my knowledge base on that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I'm looking at the instructions right now.
We can mark that a we'll find out and get back to you, Carmen. Yeah. Next question from Matthew Benko. How would this ECSI service communicate and interact with existing information CMS portals? I believe he asked that during the W9S portion of the presentation, if I'm not mistaken.
So if you are talking about the W9S service, we provide the CSV report, and then you could take that report that we provide to you and absorb that, into your system. So I mean, there would be a little bit of programming on your side just to accept that report. But once that's done, once you have that programming completed, then you can just download that report at whatever interval you would like, and that would update those for you.
Yeah, it's more of a file interface than truly integrated into a student information system. Like Deanna said, you would have to do just a bit of programming just to read in that CSV file into your system, pull that information over.
Okay. Next question, Sharon Berry, just you had asked that somebody would for somebody to reach out regarding our 1098 solution. We will mark your name down and we'll absolutely have somebody reach out to you regarding 1098Ts. Next question from Carol Boyer Yancey. What is the deadline for students for the opt-in if it starts on September 9th?
So we say that students need to opt in by January 1st. 2023, just to make sure that they are in the system and they will get that 1098T form electronically.
Okay, here is another anonymous question. What about a medical services fee? The fee is required, but allows the students to receive services through the medical clinic.
So I'm going to say no, because health or disability insurance fees, even if required, are excluded from the 1098T form.
Right. Yeah, that's right here.
Melody Rahaman, I hope I said that okay, is asking how you register for the training. We can send out the training information from ECSI. I'll mark your information down and get that out to you later today. And just a comment for Deanna, from Kathy Rudiman, no question, but I just wanted to say that Deanna rocks, and we all agree here at ECSI. Deanna does rock.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Question from Debbie Casperson. Do we delete from the file high school students that took summer camps?
So if they received academic credit for the courses, I think you need to provide it to them. I can double check on that though and get back to you. But if they received credit for a college credit for it.
And there's a lot of schools that have that kind of arrangement too.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty sure you have to provide the form, like you said, if it's for the credit.
Okay, anonymous question. Do you have to provide a 1098T to an international student who requested one, even if their tuition was fully covered by a scholarship?
So I'm going to say no, because even if they're a non-resident alien and they've requested one, they still fall under the exception because everything was covered by grants or scholarships.
Okay, next question. Let's see here. What is the testing period? Can SSN be sent for verification during this time? That's an anonymous question.
So the testing period is going to run this year from October 24th through December 16th. And I would say that if you are signed up for the SSN validation service, you should absolutely, my advice for a client who has the SSN validation service is to send that file in as early as possible so that you can get your results back. You can review everything, see who's not passing, and then you'll have time to get in touch with those students to try and get the correct social security number. So I say the earlier the better.
We are right at noon. Anybody who wants to stick around to get we are going to continue answering questions, please do. If you're not able to, that is, I know we're running into some people's lunch hour. So, but we will send this out. It'll take us some time to edit the presentation, and then we will get that out along with the presentation. And we will also email anybody who had questions that we needed to get back to you on. So just as a heads up, but Chris and Deanna, I assume you guys are okay to keep going?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. Next question from Nicole Brown. In regards to the prior year payments, what if the payment is from tuition that was billed in the year 2000? I would imagine they already received a 1098T for that, since we issued 1098Ts based on what was billed, not payments received. Would this still qualify them to receive another 1098T?
I want to say that there was a limit as far as how back it would go. And I
Isn't
wanna
that
say it
double
was-
dipping? Possibly.
Yes, but I also know that when the IRS made the change from box 2 to box 1, there was understanding that there would be that double dipping could occur because of the change. But I want to say that for some reason I want to say it's 2002. Like if it's further back than 2002, it doesn't. I'll need to double check. But I want to say it's 2002 is as far back as you would go.
Okay, so we'll mark that we will get back to you, Nicole. Leslie Bulgren asked, should College Credit Plus students receive a 1098T?
So I'm not 100% sure what College Credit Plus is referring to. Chris, do you know?
No, I've never heard the term.
All right, so I mean, there are 4 exceptions. So I would say that if the College Credit Plus students don't fall under one of those 4 exceptions, then they should get one. So courses for which no academic credit is offered, even if the student is otherwise enrolled in a degree program, the non-resident aliens, unless they request it, students whose qualified tuition related expenses are entirely waived or paid entirely with scholarships, and then
Payment arrangement.
the billing arrangement. Yeah,
Billing
so
arrangement.
if they don't fall into one of those 4 exceptions, then I would say you have to provide it to them.
Okay, next question from June Fiorino. If a student who previously did not qualify for an SSN or a TIN presents a newly acquired SSN or TIN after the 1098T year has closed, is the college required to create a 1098T?
So if they're a non-resident alien and they didn't have a social security number and then they get one and ask you for it, then I would say yes, because they've now met that requirement where they're asking you to generate the 1098T for them. If it was not a non-resident alien, so this is just a student who did not Oh, well, I guess that not having it and not actually qualifying for one. So yeah, I would say this would be that non-resident alien situation where they didn't have one, but then they obtained one and are asking for their 1098T form now. So in that case, yes, because they're asking for it.
So on your list of report versus do not report, you list the student life/activity fee as required to report. We've previously excluded this fee because half of the revenue supports the health services, free counseling. Should this be excluded from the 1098T?
So this is going back to, can you read that again?
Sure. On your list of report or do not report, you list the student life/activity fee as required to report. We've previously excluded this fee because half of the revenue supports health services or free counseling. Should this be excluded from the 1098T?
So half of it. I don't know the answer. I don't.
I don't either, because it's like
It sounds like half of it though.
yeah, it sounds like
It's
part of
under
it should
required
and part of it
control.
shouldn't, because part of it is something that is required and the other part is something that shouldn't, or should be reported in part that shouldn't.
And I don't know if a school has the sophistication in their system to be able to
Split it out.
parse out a fee like that and apply part that you would report versus what you wouldn't. I mean, obviously, on our end, we're not scrutinizing anything like that, right? We're just getting the file and producing the form. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one.
So next question from Doug Simon, and I know we answered something related to this earlier. We have a high school partnership program teaching our curriculum at their high school, that the student and family pays the high school, and then the high school pays the school for the credits. Is a 1098T required? This one's a little different than the other one.
Wouldn't that be considered a payment from all sources?
Yeah, I think it really goes back to whether or not the student is receiving college credit for it or not.
Okay.
And if they are, then you would
Mm-hmm.
provide a 1098T.
Right.
Yeah.
How many years back can a student request a 1098T?
Weren't you telling me about this, Deanna, not too long ago?
I don't remember, Chris.
I thought where you say we get a lot of schools that come to us and have us produce forms for prior years, like all the time.
Yeah, but I think they're asking, if they don't have a form for a student, so like a non-resident alien that attended, and graduated 5 years ago, can they come back and say, I want a 1098T form for all these years I attended because they have a social now? I think that's what they're asking.
Sure.
And I'll be honest, I don't know if there is a limit, so I'll have to look into that and get back.
So next question, is it okay to provide a 1098T to a student who doesn't have a social security number?
Yes. So if you do not have a social security number for a student, that is not a reason to not provide them with a 1098T form. You just want to make sure that if you don't have a social security number for a student, that you do your due diligence in trying to obtain it so that you can check the box saying that you did that, so you can certify that TIN.
Next question from Andrew Ead. I don't know. I know I messed that one up. Following up on that, would we then need to submit that newly issued form to the IRS? I'm not 100% sure what that's in regards to. Andrew, if you're still here, if you could just mention which question you're asking that for, unless you guys remember.
No.
So I think he might be asking about the, if they're a non-resident alien asking for a form because they just obtained a social security number. I feel like that's probably what he's asking for. And then would it need to be submitted? Yes.
Thanks, Deanna. Next question from Brenda Postma. How do we distinguish between degree seeking and non-degree seeking students? We only have to report degree seeking, correct?
So, if there's no academic credit that's being offered, you wouldn't. So how do we? So I don't know if I'm understanding exactly what you're asking.
Brenda, if you're still out there, if you can raise your hand, we'll unmute you and you can ask your question. We'll keep going and we'll keep that one open. And then if Brenda happens to raise her hand, then we can get back to that. Next question, we're almost through them. Follow up on your comment regarding payment arrangement from the VA. Are you saying that we do not need to generate a 1098-T for those students who, if fully covered by the VA? If yes, are those not considered payments from all sources?
So if it's a formal billing arrangement between the institution and the VA, then no, you don't have to, because even though that is, payments from all sources, it's excluded for that other reason from needing it, being required to provide them with a 1098-T form.
Okay, next, would money paid toward continuing education classes count as box 1 payments, though the credits earned are not going towards a degree?
So if they're getting academic credit, then they would need to get a, they would need to be furnished with a 1098-T form.
Andrew did put in a question that you answered his question, Deanna. So
okay.
Received an anonymous question that said, I would like more information about your secure W-9S option. What we'll do when we send out, because I don't know who you are that asked that, anybody who's looking for additional information, whenever I send out the presentation along with I'll also provide our contact information. Anybody who asked to be contacted, we'll make sure you are contacted, but if anybody else would like more information, you can use the sales@ecsi.net as Chris has put up here on the screen. And we'll get you to the right person. Additionally, if you have any other questions, you can send them to that sales@ecsi.net and we'll make sure they get to the right place. Mary Lou, yes, there will be a recording available for this. So we will be sending that out. It will likely go out to everybody tomorrow. We'll have to do a little bit of editing, but we will get that out to everybody. I think, let's see, we might have a few more questions in the chat. Deanna and Chris, do you still have time for a few more questions, or do we need to wrap it up and we can always get back to everybody with answers?
I'm
I
good,
have,
I'm good.
yeah, I have a couple more minutes.
Okay, great. Let me just, the ones in the chat are a little bit more difficult just because we got to scroll to them. If a student updates their social security number through ECSI, will that stay there permanently for every year for clients that are using ECSI, even though if Banner is not updated with that social security number?
So if a student receives a 1098-T form from us and they then go in and complete a W-9S to update the social security number on the 1098-T form, what we do is we actually send that information to the school, the updated, like the W-9S update, so that they can update it in their system because it would not override. So, and what I mean by that is, you know, we can update the form that's out there now, but then if the next year you send us that student in your file and it still has that old social, we're going to create it under the social security number that you have in your file for the student. We wouldn't update it because we don't really have a way to match because the socials aren't going to match. So there's really no way for us to say that, you know, this Matt Smith and that Matt Smith are the same Matt Smith, so let's update it. We can't do that. So whatever you have in your file is what's going to be created for them on their form with that specific social security number. That's why we send that information when we do get a W-9S update from a 1098-T form.
Okay, question from Amanda Woodward. Is the consent for receipt of 1098-Ts electronically required annually, or if a student consented in year one, can we assume they want it electronically going forward unless they advise us otherwise?
They don't need to consent every year.
Okay.
So once we have a consent, it'll be out there for the student unless they go in and say, you know, with this, I don't want to get them electronically anymore.
So they can withdraw their consent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Last question, Amber Alexander. Last question we have time for today, but like I said, we will make a note of these. It may take us a couple more days to get all of the questions answered, so stay tuned on that, but we'll get everything out for the recording and the slides. We'll get those out tomorrow. We may need just a little bit more time on some of the questions. So last question we'll do today. If we have solicited for SSNs and therefore mark the box on the 1098-T, if a student's SSN is found to be invalid afterwards, are we still liable and subject to fines?
So you may get a penalty notice from the IRS because it's incorrect, but that comes back to that dispute process that we were talking about. Because what you could then do, if you get one, which you might not because you certified, if you certify the 10, you might not get one. But if you do get a penalty notice, then you can go back to the IRS and say, hey, you know, I did what I was supposed to do to try and get this student's correct 10. So you could dispute it at that point.
And actually, Tammy Underwood has asked this, and she's looking to see if anyone has a successful response template answer for students or parents when they question box 1 when it is empty. Often payments and/or aid is applied in a following calendar year just because of the way bills are run in an academic year. And 1098-Ts are a calendar year. It is difficult for them to understand and most often believe they are going to be subject to income tax implications. I don't know if anyone has any, or if we have any information on that, we could send it to Tammy.
I know I don't have any like canned response for something like that.
Looks like Susan sent a response. I explained to them that the IRS runs on the calendar year and we have to report as such. Thanks, Susan. Okay,